Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Transcending Together with Julianne and Lee. Good afternoon, beautiful and amazing human beings. I hope you are all having a good afternoon. You enjoyed my music show from before the break, and you weren't too depressed by the news. Very, very tricky times. But before we get into it, it's a hello from me.
And it's a hello from Lee. How are you all?
Well, I hope everybody out there is somehow keeping sane. Yeah, I don't know. We've got quite a lot to talk about this week, and we debated whether or not to talk about the Israel-Palestine thing, but we've decided that we can't not talk about it. So we are going to have a chat about that. But first, I wanted to just catch up with you all on the Labour Party conference. Did you see any of the outcomings from that, Lee?
I must confess I didn't really follow it too closely. I guess there wasn't a sensational headline like at the Tory conference where, Rishi said a man is a man. So it didn't pop up on my radar. I was busy looking into other things. But yeah, I mean, it sounded like it went all right. What do you think?
Yeah, I was quite surprised nobody tried to catch Keir Starmer out with "What do you say a woman is?" And what we talked about last week, I don't know that they necessarily have broken left, which is what we were hoping, but you're never going to get something as bold and left wing as, say, what Jeremy Corbyn would do. So if this means that there's a better chance of winning the next election, I guess that's something we should just take the win for now, especially given, and what we talked about, didn't we, last week? We said the best thing for them, for Labour to do, is just ignore the culture war and just not engage. And I think that's what they did. They just stuck to policy. They still, I guess, this whole thing around self ID is still such a toxic thing at the moment. And then, yeah, of course, J.K. Rowling was up at some feminist gathering up in Glasgow over the weekend. I saw some nonsense about that. But it just sort of comes back to me around we've just got to kind of ignore it, right? Just don't engage on this culture war because, yeah, to quote Sun Tzu, don't go to battle when someone else has chosen the battlefield. So yeah, that's my take from it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's they certainly didn't engage in the culture war rhetoric, so you got to give them some points for that. And it looks like, from the little bit of reading that I have done about it, is that they're looking for economic stability and rebuilding. Um, you know, and I think that's quite needed here now is economic recovery.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think the focus has to be on trying to fix the train wreck that is our economy at the moment. So yeah, um, it was all very sound. I thought there wasn't anything too out there or controversial. I think it's very difficult for anyone to disagree with them what they've chosen to do, which I think is clever. So yeah, we will see now how they position, I guess, around the um, the issue on trans rights. So that's going to be an interesting one. I thought I saw something, and I don't know if it was proposed or if they've actually done it. There was this thing around banning trans women from women's hospital wards.
I did hear about that quite recently, but it seems to have gone quite quiet. It was just kind of like a
Yeah.
headline that I picked up.
It's just another of these things that's just a complete non-issue, because I think if you're in hospital, the only thing you want to focus on is getting better and getting out of there. No one wants to be in hospital. So I guess to that extent, um, I don't think it's anything anyone's particularly worried about. I think it's just certain people who like to make the most noise about it. Um, so yeah, the empty cans, empty vessels make more noise, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm kind of tiptoeing around uh, the difficult topic to get into. Um, what What are your thoughts on the Israel-Palestine conflict, then, Lee? I'll let you go first.
Yeah. It's very interesting, isn't it? And it's quite alarming, really, to see what's actually going on there and how it can escalate from here is quite frightening, really. You know, if other third parties start getting involved, um, yeah, it does feel like biblical end times are upon us, so to speak. Um, yeah, very. I'm watching it very very closely to see what develops because I think this is you know the number one thing, the number one news item at the moment, and quite rightly so. And of course, we want to be sensitive and things like that. And it just reminds me of this meme that I saw the other day. It was a picture of the globe, and it said, "Is world peace too much to ask for?" And the globe was coloured in like peas, and it was spelled world PEAS. And I stand on the side of peas in this case. But yeah, it's very worrying what's going on, and it's dynamically changing all the time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same place, I think, in terms of how dangerous this situation is. And just just to sort of put my where I guess from my perspective, I am Jewish. Well, I'm not a practicing Jew. I was born Jewish. I'm now pagan. So I am speaking with a degree of knowledge, if you like, and from the as a Jewish person speaking about it. So um, I think the first elephant in the room is to make sure people understand when we're talking about this subject, we're not, there is, and I know people can't seem to get this into their heads, that anti Semitism and anti Israel are two completely different things. And I was chatting to a friend of mine over the weekend about this, and he was saying that, well, his Jewish friends say you can't be pro-Semitic and anti-Israel. And I was like, well, that's like saying every single South African, black, white, brown, orange, was responsible for apartheid. You, people were anti-apartheid, but they still were pro the people of South Africa. So, and I'm probably going to draw a lot of parallels when we talk about this particular issue because you can't paint everyone with the same brush. And I've been watching a lot of stuff. Owen Jones actually covered this really well on his YouTube channel, where he had Jewish Israeli aid workers who were working to try and support the Palestinians and their perspective on it. And then I did see some other people talking about it where this guy was saying, that the two things are antithetical. You can't have Palestine and Israel occupying the same space. And, that's a whole other thing. Um, and this is really where the first parallel, I think, comes in, is the apartheid regime in South Africa set up homelands, semi-autonomous homelands. And they said to the people of color, you guys go have that space. We're keeping the rest. And you can self-govern in your homelands. And, yeah, leave us alone. And that's, in a way, no different to what's happened with Israel and Palestine, is they've said to them, okay, you guys can have the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. You can be semi-autonomous. And I say semi-autonomous because in the same way the South African government used to love to go in and beat up in Bophuthatswana and was Lesotho a self-governing homeland? I can't remember
No, I
now.
think it's an independent country.
But it wasn't always though.
Yeah.
What were the homelands? There was Bophuthatswana, which was up near the Botswana border. Transkei, that was the other one. But yeah, so that's a very interesting parallel. And the rest of the world said, you can't possibly do that. You can't quarantine these people into homelands that are completely surrounded by you and then block all access in and out. So yeah, I think that's the first parallel that I wanted to really put on the table there. So when people say Israel is an apartheid state, that's one check in the box there, because structurally it's no different to the way apartheid South Africa was in that respect. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, and it just from the perspective of apartheid, yes, there are parallels, but also I think it's important if we have a look at how that situation evolved peacefully and perhaps take some lessons aboard from history. I know they are like different issues at the core of it, but it just kind of like gives a bit of hope that world peace will, come out of this, because there are lessons to be learned, and I know it's slightly different, the conflict, and there's more of a historical and religious overtone to it, but I still think that there is hope by looking at the example of South Africa.
Yeah, oh, definitely. But you kind of have to admit there's a problem before you can set about fixing it. Um, and I think there's another parallel. And my dad always used to say, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. And the apartheid regime used the right to self-defense as an excuse to carry out its brutal oppression, which ultimately culminated in the Sharpeville massacre. And I guess it's down to, it just depends which way world opinion's going at the time, because for decades the West supported the apartheid regime, and then when it was no longer politically correct to do so, they swapped sides. But had they still been supporting the apartheid regime, they probably would have got away with the Sharpeville massacre.
Mm.
So public sentiment and, world sentiment tends to be a fairly loosely defined point of morality, because I think that's what this comes down to, is the morality of it. And I don't the scary thing is that when it comes to Israel and Palestine, they're both right and they're both wrong.
Yeah. And therein
And
lies the conundrum.
yeah, because absolutely, the Israel has a right to exist, and Hamas have committed themselves to destroying the state of Israel. That does make them enemies of the state. This is true. So, to that extent, Israel is in the right. And if Hamas, I mean, remember back in the 80s, late 80s, 90s, it was all PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization with Yasser
Yeah,
Arafat. And he was deemed a terrorist until he wasn't. And then they actually achieved a settlement with the PLO. And they had relative peace for a while. But the thing, in order for Israel to come to the table with the PLO had to drop their insistence on the destruction of Israel, which the PLO did. That caused Hamas to branch away from them, and Hamas have kept that. And that's where Hamas are wrong, because it's just not going to happen. That's not an outcome that the world is ever going to let happen. And they need to just understand that. And this issue goes back, I mean, we talk about it, it goes back into biblical times. So it's not an easy thing to resolve. But at the end of the day, they are one people. And this is just more religious nonsense, because it's my God is better than your God type thing. But
absolutely. Yeah.
it's the same God.
Same God.
So, yeah, let's go to a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk some more about this. See you in a bit.
The world's largest radio station for the trans community. Trans Radio UK.
Welcome back, beautiful and amazing human beings. So, yeah, so we were just talking before the break about some of the parallels between the apartheid state in South Africa and apartheid Israel. And so, and I mentioned that thing about one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And of course, Nelson Mandela was deemed a terrorist. And the terror campaign that was run by the ANC with the bombing of Magoo's Bar in Durban, they were terrorists. If you consider the definition of a terrorist is a non-state actor, so you don't have the power of being, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, you've got national interests on both sides. No side is the terrorist. But when you've got a non-state actor like Hamas, who don't have the legitimacy of being a nation, they almost automatically deemed terrorist. But then during the Arab Spring, which saw the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi, and I can't remember who the Egyptian guy was that got overthrown, why weren't they terrorists? Why were they freedom fighters? Because they were non-state actors. And it's all about perspective. It's all about what the media tells you. The media tells you who's the freedom fighter and who's the terrorist. What do you think, Lee?
Oh, absolutely. I think definitely the media does support that view. And we've mentioned this before about, sort of like the mainstream media and basically what they dictating that you understand by showing you perhaps one side over another side and things like that. And, I think that the media does play a huge role in determining that definition, freedom fighter versus versus terrorist. And again, it's coming to the fore, with the media basically telling you what to think and how to think, and you're not thinking for yourself. You're not looking at both perspectives and determining your own outcome and your own understanding of the situation. People are basically told what to think. And we touched on this in a previous show where we spoke about the digital dystopia that we're living in. And I think the media has a huge role to play in that, a huge role.
Yeah, you've got to maintain an open mind. You've got to think to yourself, it's not even about taking sides, it's about understanding. I mean, down here in Brighton, at the clock tower, there has been an almost permanent presence of Palestinian support groups the Palestinians have been trying to raise awareness about the issues for decades. And, even if you look at the previous political settlement, which saw the Gaza Strip and the West Bank put under Palestinian control, it hasn't stopped the Israeli government from settling people in those spaces. So that's not keeping up with the agreement. And what's happened, I think, is that they have just, when people have got nothing left to lose, that's when they lose it. And I think this has been brewing for a long time. Nobody's been listening. And I think the saddest thing is that people can't seem to take a nuanced view on this. They can't see that there are wrong people and right people on both sides of this debate. No one side is entirely without blame. And that just really, I find that very disappointing that you can't have a nuanced debate about it. It's like that friend of mine saying, you can't be pro-Semitic and anti-Israel. Well, yeah, you can. You can condemn the actions of the Israeli government without being anti-Semitic. And that for me is really the key tipping point there. And I mean, when you think about Nelson Mandela, what I always found quite ironic all those years ago was he was a freedom fighter. He went from terrorist to freedom fighter when the Americans and the British changed sides. I mean, there was another one in Angola, Jonas Savimbi. Jonas Savimbi ran a terror campaign in Angola, brutal terror campaign in Angola, largely because they wanted to gain control of the oil fields in Angola. And not many people know that Angola is a very oil-rich country. And the Americans obviously had a big presence there. Texaco Oil Company had a big presence there. And Savimbi was basically the cornerstone of his terror campaign, if you want to call it that, was to wrest control of Angolan oil away from the Americans. And the Americans supported South Africa because South Africa sent their sons to die for America in Angola, fighting against Savimbi. Then one day Savimbi turned around and he said, well, if America chooses to back us, we will honor their oil rights. And literally overnight, that's when America flipped. They said, okay, well, we don't need South Africa anymore. So, sorry, guys, you're the terrorists now.
Yeah, you're the bad guys.
And suddenly Savimbi was the great liberator of Angola. So you've got to look at history. You have to keep looking at history. And see how these people switch sides all the time. I mean, even for the people in the UK, Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is another really good topical, geographically local issue where there are people in Northern Ireland who want to be part of a united Ireland. And there are people in Northern Ireland who want to remain part of the United Kingdom. So again, 70s, 80s was all about the IRA and the Jerry Adams, who was the sort of head of the military arm of Sinn Féin. And interestingly enough, it was actually Jeremy Corbyn that negotiated the peace deal, which brought Sinn Féin to the table in order for Northern Ireland to actually start its path towards peace. But even that is extremely tenuous because those factions are still there. And yeah, being a Zimbabwean born when it was Rhodesia, and the Rhodesian, when Rhodesia was a colony of Britain, Britain said, okay, you've got to hand it over. And the Rhodesians said, hell no, we won't. And they declared UDI, which Unilateral Declaration of Independence, which then led to the sanctions, and Rhodesia went from being a government to a regime. They love to use the word regime when it's bad. You can always tell what they want you to think on a particular issue. But yeah, so Britain flipped on Rhodesia and said, no, you must give it back. And I remember thinking at the time, and I wasn't very old, but it did occur to me that what's the difference then with Northern Ireland? If there's a significant portion of the population of Northern Ireland who want to be part of a united Ireland, then why is that different? And you look at what the British did in Northern Ireland, with their military occupation, their military police. How is that different? And this is the thing that, again, it just comes back to this ridiculous situation where the media tells us who the good guy and who the bad guy is. And then everybody just falls in lockstep without actually standing back and thinking, well, hang on a minute. Maybe I haven't seen the whole picture.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, I think you touched on it just, a little bit last week when we spoke about it. And you were saying, it's not the people that you're against. It's their government organizations. And at the end of the day, we've just got to remember that there are people involved on both sides of any conflict. And where's the humanitarian support for the people? You don't have to pick a side, but stand for peace. Stand for the people that are being affected by this.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's just people. It's people's lives. And, the politicians love pictures of kissing babies because they think that makes them look human. And then in the same way, we've got to blast onto the front pages really awful pictures of dismembered children who've been bombed. And the world has been calling out the West. I mean, who's a guy? Julian Assange is rotting in prison. He's not even been found guilty of anything, but he's still in jail for exposing the way the Americans were bombing the hell out of civilians. How many people under Obama's drone war, how many innocent families were killed because they bombed the wrong place? But they're the good guys. They're the white hats. So they're doing it to liberate these countries. And it's never about that. It's never about that. There's a nice conspiracy theory about this, which we can get into after the commercial break. See you in a bit.
The world's largest radio station for the trans community. Trans Radio UK.
Welcome back, beautiful and amazing human beings. I hope you had a good break. Certainly, Lee and I needed a few moments to decompress a bit there. Lee was talking in the break about bricks, and we're not talking about things you build houses out. What are the bricks?
So the bricks are a collection of so-called third world countries or third world economies comprising of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And they've kind of like formed their own little club, if you like. And they get together and have conferences and all the rest of it and support each other. And it's about developing nations and developing their economies and things like that. And it's become quite popular, and a lot of other nations now, countries, are looking at joining BRICS, so expanding it. And you've got places like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Argentina, United Arab Emirates, all wanting to join this club now. And along with that expansion, it's like those nations that want to join BRICS are all commodity-driven economies, particularly oil and things like that. And I think it's going to have quite an interesting effect on the global economy, particularly as the BRICS nations are talking about using a gold-backed monetary unit. And as you touched on earlier, Julie, about when you don't want to buy stuff in US dollars, how bad that can be for you. So yeah, I just think it's going to be interesting when they expand. And I think the expansion, these other countries are joining at the beginning of 2024.
I mean, if you just you just take Russia, India, and China, probably at the forefront of the space race as well. Imagine if they all got together. That would be interesting. Have our own little Star Wars.
Yeah.
I wonder who the Jedi would be. Who's the Sith and who's the Jedi in that equation? Yeah, that's really interesting because I mean, you mentioned Venezuela. I mean, that's another country that's massively oil rich. Also started selling oil in euros and got promptly overthrown. So there's definitely a very straight line between oil and who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. And I mean, the reality is the West has never met a dictator they're not willing to do a deal with. If you're my dictator, you're okay. Until you're not. And that's what Saddam Hussein found out to his detriment, and Gaddafi and Maduro and Venezuela. They were all just like today's darling is tomorrow's dictator all of a sudden. So yeah, I mean, it's you look at Saudi Arabia's human rights record, and you just, I mean, don't even get me started on the war in Yemen and how what Saudi Arabia is getting up to in Yemen. I mean, that's a whole other thing as well. It's just an absolute giant freaking mess, and it's all about oil. And if ever there was a need, I think, for us to just stop oil, I think if we stopped oil, we could end a lot of these resource wars, because it's just getting absolutely ridiculous. And of course, water's the next one.
Yeah,
I think water's going to be a big deal
absolutely.
in the coming years. So yeah, lots there. Um, so yeah, I think I'm exhausted after all that. I think, yeah, I think just closing out the whole Israeli-Palestine thing, I just would encourage all our listeners just to not follow the media, because it's the same media that's telling everybody trans people are the problem.
Exactly.
Are the same media that's saying it's Palestinians that are the problem, and it's the wrong perspective. You have to say they're both wrong and they're both right, and not say one is 100% right while the other one is 100% wrong, because there's stuff wrong on both sides. And you've often said this, Leah, that there's he said, she said, and then the truth, and that's something I think that people need to bear in mind. Um, I thought it'd be quite nice to close out on maybe a more light-hearted conspiracy theory, and we talked a little bit about Nelson Mandela earlier. Have you heard about the Mandela Effect, Lee?
Yes, I have, and I'm fascinated by it. I really am, and it's like quite an amazing phenomenon, I think. And I'm not
What do you know
sure
about it?
many people know about it. Okay, it's first of all, it's named after Nelson Mandela, who we've been talking about, and the term was first coined by somebody called Fiona Broom in 2009 when she discovered that she, along with many others, falsely remembered Nelson Mandela dying in prison during the 1980s when he actually passed away in 2013. And this collective misremembering of a well known fact led to the term the Mandela Effect. Um, and there's plenty of examples about it. And I think the most famous one for me is um, the fairy tale Snow White, when many people recall the phrase mirror, mirror on the wall. Well, the actual correct term is magic mirror on the wall. Now, I remember mirror, mirror on the wall, not magic mirror on the wall.
Yeah, I mean, that was like, how can so many people misremember it in that way?
Yeah,
And um, yeah, and my actually the one that's most topical for me is, of course, I've chosen this as the motto for my club, which is, if you build it, they will come.
yeah.
And that's from the movie Field of Dreams. And I apologize for my dogs in the background if you can hear them. And in the Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner builds this baseball diamond. And the line I've always remembered, if you build it, they will come. And the movie culminates with all of these past baseball players emerging out of the wheat field. And so it made sense, you know? But then apparently the line is, if you build it, he will come. And they say, no, the whole movie was just about his relationship with his father. And if he, by building the baseball field, his father came back, came. And I'm like, no, but there were like lots of, there was Babe Ruth, there was all of these. So that's one that's always fascinated me. And then there's the Forrest Gump one. Do you know that one?
Remind me?
So when Forrest Gump is sitting on the bench with his box of chocolates, and the woman's sitting next to him, and he says to her, the way I remember it, and the grammatically correct way, is, My mama once told me life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get,
Uh-huh.
right? And if you watch the movie now, it's my mama once told me life is like a box of chocolates. And it doesn't make sense in the context of, if you were telling someone something someone said to you before, you would use the past tense. That's why I say it's grammatically correct to
Basically,
say
yeah,
life was like a box of chocolates,
yeah.
because he was remembering a past thing. So, yeah, that one also fascinates me.
I think
What
the
other
the
ones do you know?
the other one is the famous line from Star Wars, which is often misquoted as Luke, I am your father. Well, the actual line is, no, I am your father.
I know, I know. And there's like memes
Yeah.
and T-shirts and stuff. Like you go back. Um, I remember actually the first time that hit me was the first time I was watching the original trilogy with my son, and I'm like, oh, here comes the line, here comes the line, and I was waiting for Luke, I
I
am
am
your
your
father,
father.
and he says, no,
No,
I am your
I
father.
am your father.
Like I was like,
Huh?
that when did that happen?
When did that change?
Yeah. Um, Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think that there is a lot to be, I think there's something in it. I think the idea that somehow people just misremember things, um, I think it's more than that. I like to think, maybe because it's a little bit more interesting, I kind of like to think that there has been a time slip
Mm,
somewhere along the line.
yeah,
Um,
jumping of the timelines.
yeah, because there's this other really interesting conspiracy theory, and it's about Donald Trump. And the way it goes is we talked about Nikola Tesla
Mm,
last week. And the person who, when they seized all of his research, it was gathered up and catalogued by Donald Trump's uncle.
uncle, yeah.
And they what this whole thing is about is they say that one of the reasons why Donald Trump, well, let me take a step back. So the story goes that part of what Tesla had, um, was the ability to see into the future, was some mechanism, and it was like a type of mirror or something, some that created so much energy that you could actually look into the future. And they saying that Donald Trump must have had access to that, and he saw himself winning the 2020 election, which is why he is so absolutely certain that some skullduggery went on. And I wonder if that isn't part of this time slip. Is, if you follow it through, maybe he was with his uncle one day and they had a look, and his uncle said, look, one day you will be a two-term president of the
Yeah.
United States. And then it didn't happen. And he was like, but if it's true, that's what he saw.
Mm,
And that's why he just can't understand how this is even possible. And I wonder if that's not because of this time slip. So it's a slightly different timeline now where he didn't win it.
mm.
That's like
Fascinating, fascinating. We'll have to go in depth on that one and others
Yeah, we will.
in another show.
We will. Because we're running out of time. I hope this last little light-hearted section has helped you decompress a bit. We'll have more to talk about on some of these more bizarre conspiracy theories out there. I think it makes for interesting watching. And just to remind you that we are now on Rumble. So look up Transcending Together on Rumble. You can also find us on YouTube. I will put some links out on the Substack, which is, of course, still there, tigergirl.substack.com. And hopefully you will see us there. So any final thoughts, Lee?
Yeah, just do your own research and think for yourself. And enjoy the rest of your week until next time.
Yeah, thanks everybody. With that, it's a goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from Lee.
See you all next week. Bye.